The Witch Must Burn, Chapter 8. Dorothy's palace in the Emerald City had gardens far grander than Glinda's, though never in a million years would I have been dumb enough to point that out. Even so, Glinda's gardens were nothing to sneeze at. A little heavy on the pink flowers for my taste, of course. Rows and rows of sweet-smelling singing roses, in a dozen variations of the shade, towering pink lilac trees which released visible puffs of perfumed smoke at intervals, an orchard full of pink-barked trees, each of which bore a different pink fruit, peaches, apples, hot pink pomegranates, points for creativity, I guess, even if not for realism. There are even tiny pink flowers that covered the winding paths through the decorative portion of the garden like a carpet, and when you stepped on them they shot out little jets of pink glitter. By the time I got back to the kitchen I was going to look like a disco ball. It took me a while to find the vegetable garden, which was more or less hidden behind a low pink brick wall, and which bore little resemblance to the rest of the landscaping. The plants here had a distinctively practical feel, unlike the rest of the gardens, which were beautiful, but obviously designed to catch Glinda's unnatural passion for pink. Those more humble rows of vegetables and herbs were comforting in their hominess. I had been so young when my parents died, and I had no memory of them. All I knew was that Ozma had told me that I had been born in a small village in the Oz countryside, to people who were too humble to leave me anything other than my name. Ozma had taken me in because I had no other family and nowhere else to go. Wandering the rows of the vegetable garden, I wondered if my parents had grown food like this. If maybe they'd sat down every night to a dinner of crisp green lettuce and ruby red tomatoes pulled from the earth just moments earlier. I rarely thought about my parents. What good did it do to wonder? But for a moment in Glinda's garden I stopped to consider what my life would have been like if they hadn't died. Maybe I'd be in the countryside somewhere, lying in a field napping underneath the warm sun or reading a book. Maybe my life would be my own, not Dorothy's. But thinking like that was useless, and bound to get me nowhere. There was no point in crying about it. My life was what it was. There's no way I'd ever get away from Glinda, or Dorothy, or whatever they had in store for Oz. I was lucky to even have a job. Since Dorothy came back, there were rumors of Munchkins going hungry for the first time in Oz history. The winged monkeys were little more like zombies these days, only too eager to obey whatever the Tin Woodman ordered them to do, even if it meant harassing innocent citizens. Some of the servants at the palace talked about friends and relatives who were out of work, something that had never happened before in our history. It was like Dorothy had brought some terrible disease with her from the other place, one you couldn't see. I shook my head, trying to rid myself of such dark thoughts. There was nothing I could do to solve Oz's problems from Glinda's garden, and it was such a relief to be outside, alone, with the sun on my shoulders and the trilling of songbird in my ears. As Dorothy's had made, I had little time to myself in the Emerald City, and I'd imagined that Glinda would be watching me like a hawk out here. But Nox had given me the gift of a morning out from under her scrutiny, and I was determined not to let a second of it go to waste. When I had filled my basket to Nox's specifications, I went out of the vegetable garden back to the flower garden. Despite the overwhelming influence of Glinda's dubious taste, it was still a beautiful place on a sunny morning. I sat with my back against one of the fruit trees and closed my eyes. It wouldn't do to fall asleep out here, but surely no one would notice if I took a moment to rest before I went back inside to face whatever Glinda had in store for me next. Suddenly, a sinister dulcet tones of Glinda's voice cut through the serene air, and I froze in terror. "Of course, we're so delighted to see you," she thrilled. How had she find me here? Had Nox sent her after me? Why hadn't she just used the burn pin megaphone? I flung myself up against the nearest tree, and my heart pounding as she continued. "We have so much to discuss, my dear friend." I craned my neck around the tree, desperately hoping she couldn't see. She obviously wasn't talking of me, and I didn't recognize the little man at her side. But in an instant, I knew exactly who he was. The wizard, I thought.